rock's madman, the Prince of Darkness. Ozzy Ossbourne wasn't just a singer. He was a force of nature, a survivor, and ultimately the architect of a fortune as wild, vast, and unforgettable as the life he led. Now, at the end of his journey, he leaves behind more than music. He leaves behind a legacy drenched in pain, rebellion, and extraordinary wealth, one that brought his family to tears when they gathered in their sprawling English estate on that somber July evening. The walls that had absorbed decades of laughter, arguments, and music now held only the echo of what once was. At the time of his passing, Ozzy's fortune was estimated at over $220 million, built over 5 decades of relentless touring, platinum albums, and televised chaos. The man who once slept on a mattress in a Birmingham hovel had transformed himself into rock royalty. But for Sharon, Jack, Kelly, Amy, and Louis, that wealth represented something far heavier than gold records and property deeds. It was the physical manifestation of their patriarch's scars, each dollar earned through years of addiction battles, health struggles, and an unrelenting work ethic that pushed his fragile body to its limits. If you've ever seen someone achieve everything they ever wanted and still find themselves haunted, you know the exact weight Ozzy carried. Fame granted him everything except peace. His trembling hands, whether clutching a microphone or reaching for his family, told a story that his bank accounts never could. For 50 years, he screamed into the void, and the void not only listened, it made him rich. But here's where it gets complicated. Long before the mansions and the millions, John Michael Osborne was just a scared boy in post-war Birmingham, England. Born on December 3, 1948, he entered a world still scarred by conflict where rationing remained and opportunity seemed as distant as the moon. The cramped quarters of 14 Lodge Road in Aston became his first stage, a place where he learned to use humor and mischief to escape the crushing reality of working-class life. The air in Aston hung heavy with industrial pollution, coating everything with a fine layer of soot that seemed to seep into the skin itself. Young Ozzy would often trace patterns through the dust on windowsills, creating momentary art that would be erased by the next day's factory output. His father, Jack, came home with hands permanently stained from the tool-making factory, while his mother, Lillian, stretched every pound to feed 6 children. The persistent chill of their home meant winters were spent huddled together, breaths visible in the morning light as they dressed for school. Dyslexia turned education into torture for Ozzy. Letters danced across pages, refusing to make sense, while teachers labeled him lazy or stupid. "I felt like I was drowning every time I opened a book," he would later recall. The shame of being different, of being unable to read while others advanced, left a wound that neither fame nor fortune would ever fully heal. The classroom became a battlefield where he fought daily losing battles, his intelligence masked by his inability to process written language. But even then, in the midst of educational failure and economic hardship, there was that voice. The same voice that would one day fill stadiums emerged first in air raid shelters, where young Ozzy sang to drown out the remnants of his wartime fears. His earliest audience wasn't fans, but family, gathering around to hear the strange, powerful sound coming from their otherwise ordinary son. By 15, he'd had enough of formal education. Dropping out of school, he cycled through menial jobs: horn tester, slaughterhouse worker, grave digger, each building the calluses that would later grip a microphone with unmatched conviction. His brief stint in prison for burglary might have been the end of his story, just another working-class lad swallowed by the system. Instead, it became the turning point that pushed him toward music as salvation rather than crime as escape, and that's when everything changed. After his release, with nothing to lose, Ozzy's father did something extraordinary. Despite their perpetual financial struggles, Jack Osbourne took out a loan to buy his son a PA system. This act of faith, investing what little they had in a dream that seemed impossible, became the foundation upon which an empire would later stand. Ozzy placed an ad in a local music shop window: "Ozzy Zig needs gig." 4 words that would alter the course of musical history. Geezer Butler answered first, leading to a short-lived band called Rare Breed. But it was the arrival of Tony Iommi and Bill Ward, 2 musicians Ozzy knew from his neighborhood, that truly set things in motion. The air was electric the first time they played together in 1968, even in a dingy rehearsal space that smelled of damp and cigarettes. Something clicked. Something dark, heavy, and entirely new. The band, initially called Earth, found its soul when they noticed people lining up for a Boris Karloff horror film called Black Sabbath. A name, an identity, and a sound coalesced simultaneously. "We weren't trying to be the Beatles," Ozzy would later explain. "We were just working-class lads playing the heaviest blues we could." That working-class ethos remained the bedrock of Black Sabbath's appeal. They weren't pretending to be anything other than what they were, four Birmingham boys channeling industrial soundscapes into something that vibrated with authentic darkness. Their first gig at the Crown Pub in Birmingham paid next to nothing, but the reaction was immediate. People stopped talking. Beer glasses froze midway to lips. The weight of what was happening registered in real time. This wasn't just music. It was the birth of an entire genre. Tony's guitar, detuned after a factory accident that had cost him fingertips, created tones that seemed to come from somewhere beneath reality itself. The record industry, however, wasn't ready. Rejection followed rejection as labels struggled to categorize what they were hearing. "It's too heavy," they said. "Too dark," they complained. "No one will listen to this," they insisted. Each dismissal only cemented the band's resolve to push further into the abyss they were creating. It took Roger Bain, a producer willing to risk his reputation, to finally give them a chance. In a single day, October 16, 1969, Black Sabbath recorded their self-titled debut album. The sessions were essentially live performances, capturing the raw energy that had been brewing in Birmingham's pubs. When Ozzy laid down the vocals for Black Sabbath, the title track that opens with the sound of rain and a church bell before descending into a tritone known as the Devil's Interval, even the studio engineers fell silent. The album dropped on Friday the 13th of February 1970, a marketing gimmick that proved unnecessary. Nothing could have prepared the world for what those grooves contained. While critics recoiled, the public responded with a fervor that suggested Sabbath had tapped into something primal and necessary. The album climbed to number 8 on the UK charts and number 23 in America. Suddenly, Ozzy wasn't just a working-class kid with a dream. He was the voice of a movement. Now, if you're wondering how a dyslexic boy who could barely read turned himself into a global icon, the answer lies partly in his partnership with the woman who would become his salvation, Sharon Arden. She entered his life through her father, Don Arden, Black Sabbath's notorious manager known as the Al Capone of pop. Their paths crossed regularly, but it wasn't until 1979, after Sabbath fired Ozzy over his spiraling substance abuse, that their relationship truly began. Sharon saw something in the broken, addicted singer that others had given up on. Not just talent, but a vulnerable soul worth saving. When everyone else saw a liability, Sharon saw potential, Jack Osbourne would later explain. "She looked at my dad and didn't see the drugs or the chaos. She saw the performer he could still be if someone believed in him." That belief transformed both their lives. Sharon took over as his manager, helped him form a new band, and began the painstaking process of rebuilding Ozzy Ossbourne as a solo artist. Their relationship was forged in fire. His addiction, her determination, and the music industry's skepticism created a crucible from which emerged both a powerful romantic partnership and a business empire. They married in 1982, creating a union that would weather storms few couples could imagine, let alone survive. The release of Blizzard of Oz in 1980 marked Ozzy's phoenix-like rise from the ashes of his Sabbath firing. The album, featuring the virtuosic guitar work of Randy Rhoads, introduced Crazy Train, a song that would become synonymous with Ozzy's brand of controlled chaos. The album went quadruple platinum, silencing doubters, and establishing Ozzy as a force independent of his former band. But triumph was followed by tragedy when Randy Rhoads died in a plane crash in 1982. The loss devastated Ozzy, threatening to derail his comeback and plunge him back into the addiction that had cost him his place in Sabbath. Instead, prodded by Sharon's unflinching support, he channeled his grief into his music, releasing Speak of the Devil later that year. Throughout the 1980s, as albums like Bark at the Moon, The Ultimate Sin, and No Rest for the Wicked solidified his solo status, Ozzy's public persona took on a life of its own. The infamous bat-biting incident during a 1982 concert in Des Moines became the stuff of rock legend. Sensationalist headlines painted him as a devil worshipper, a madman, a danger to America's youth. In reality, he was a performer who understood that shock value translated to record sales. Behind the scenes, however, the cost was mounting. Alcohol and drugs remained constant companions, stretching his marriage to breaking point and distancing him from his growing family. The dichotomy between Ozzy the performer and John the father became increasingly difficult to reconcile. Nights spent thrilling thousands were followed by mornings where he barely recognized himself in the mirror. By the 1990s, with grunge reshaping the musical landscape, many of Ozzy's contemporaries faded into irrelevance. Instead, thanks largely to Sharon's business acumen, he expanded his empire. The launch of Ozzfest in 1996 transformed him from musician to brand, creating a touring festival that introduced his catalog to a new generation while providing a platform for emerging metal bands. The turn of the millennium brought an unexpected evolution in the Osbourne saga with the debut of The Osbournes on MTV in 2002. The reality show, which ran for 4 seasons, presented an unvarnished look at the family's daily life. Ozzy, trembling from years of substance abuse, became an unlikely patriarch, confused by technology, baffled by pet messes, but undeniably loving toward his family. The show's success introduced him to audiences who had never heard Paranoid, but found themselves charmed by his mumbled profanities and gentle heart. And this is where the empire truly exploded. The Osbourne brand expanded beyond music to encompass merchandise, books, additional television shows, and endorsement deals. Sharon's vision transformed Ozzy from musician to multimedia phenomenon. Their Beverly Hills home became as recognizable as any stage he'd performed on, their family dynamics as analyzed as his lyrics. By 2025, the Osbourne fortune had grown into a complex web of assets that few could fully comprehend. The music catalog alone represented immense value: 13 solo studio albums, all the Black Sabbath material, live recordings, compilations, and the ongoing streaming royalties that brought money in daily. The publishing rights to iconic songs like Paranoid, Iron Man, Crazy, Train, and Mama, I'm Coming Home generated millions annually without Ozzy needing to lift a finger. The real estate portfolio sprawled across continents, the primary residence in Buckinghamshire, England, where English countryside serenity finally gave Ozzy the peace his restless spirit had long sought, the Hancock Park mansion in Los Angeles that had replaced their Beverly Hills home, its walls lined with gold records and family photographs, properties in New York, Florida, and a vacation home in the Bahamas where Ozzy could escape the pressure of being Ozzy Ossbourne and simply be John watching the waves from a deck chair. His car collection told the story of his evolving tastes, from the Ferrari he bought after his first solo success, a red convertible that announced to the world he was back, to the more subdued Bentley he preferred in later years, its smooth ride easier on his aging body. Each vehicle represented a chapter in his life: the Rolls-Royce purchased when The Osbournes became a hit, the vintage Aston Martin that connected him to his British roots. But this isn't just money. It's a ledger of sacrifices made by a man who spent 50 years destroying his body for the entertainment of others. The fortune that made headlines couldn't buy back the nerve damage from decades of substance abuse or ease the progression of Parkinson's disease that eventually confined him to a wheelchair. It couldn't restore the hearing damaged by years of concert volume or heal the emotional wounds inflicted by fame's isolation. For every mansion purchased, there was a hospital stay that reminded the Osbournes of wealth's limitations. For every luxury vehicle added to the collection, there was a new medication added to Ozzy's daily regimen. The weight of maintaining the Osbourne brand required a staff of dozens: assistants, business managers, accountants, lawyers, household employees, all depending on Ozzy and Sharon for their livelihoods. "People see the money, not the responsibility," Sharon once said. "They don't see Ozzy signing papers for hours even when his hands shake so badly he can barely hold the pen. They don't see the weight of knowing people's jobs depend on decisions we make." Behind closed doors, away from cameras and fans, Ozzy's health struggles intensified in his final years. The public glimpsed his vulnerability when he revealed his Parkinson's diagnosis in 2019, but few understood the daily battle he fought. Mornings began with a complex medication schedule, followed by physical therapy sessions that left him exhausted before most people had even started their day. Some days, just getting from the bedroom to the kitchen felt like performing a 2-hour show, Jack Osbourne revealed. But he never complained. He'd joke about it, make fun of himself, but never asked, "Why me?" This stoicism, this refusal to surrender to self-pity, characterized Ozzy's approach to his declining health. In private moments, when the house was quiet and pain kept him awake, Ozzy would sometimes sit in his home studio, surrounded by platinum records and memorabilia. There, among the physical evidence of his success, he would play old Black Sabbath recordings at low volume, listening to his younger self with a mixture of pride and melancholy. "I can't believe that was me," he once told Kelly during one such late-night session. "I sound so alive." These glimpses behind the Osbourne curtain reveal the true cost of rock immortality, a body breaking down decades before its time, memories clouded by years of excess, and the inescapable knowledge that no fortune could purchase additional time. Through it all, Sharon remained his constant, his anchor in a world that continued to spin too fast. Their marriage, tested by addiction, infidelity, and the relentless spotlight of fame, evolved into something that transcended typical definitions of love. She became his voice when Parkinson's slurred his words, his advocate when doctors presented treatment options, his memory when his own failed him. "We're not perfect, never have been," Sharon reflected, "but we're perfectly matched in our imperfections." This acceptance of each other's flaws, this refusal to idealize their relationship, allowed them to weather storms that sank countless celebrity marriages. When Ozzy's condition required 24-hour care, Sharon refused to hire full-time nurses, instead adapting her schedule to ensure she could be present for his most vulnerable moments. The children, Amy, Kelly, Jack, and adopted son, Louis, formed a protective circle around their father as his health declined. Each found ways to contribute to his care while maintaining the independence he had always encouraged. Jack, in particular, channeled his father's fighting spirit in dealing with his own MS diagnosis, finding in Ozzy's resilience a blueprint for facing chronic illness with dignity. Not all family relationships remained intact, however. Ozzy's first marriage to Thelma Riley had produced 2 children, Jessica and Louis, whose relationships with their father had fluctuated throughout the years. The demands of touring, followed by the intensity of addiction, created wounds that time alone couldn't heal. In his final years, Ozzy attempted reconciliation where possible, acknowledging past failures without excuses. Similarly, his relationship with his Black Sabbath bandmates experienced periods of estrangement and reconciliation. The tensions that led to his firing in 1979 never fully dissipated, though professional reunions occurred periodically. The 2025 Back to the Beginning concert in Birmingham, now recognized as his final performance, represented a full-circle moment, bringing together the original lineup one last time for a cause that mattered deeply to Ozzy. Seated on what fans dubbed his Throne of Darkness due to his inability to stand, Ozzy delivered powerful renditions of War Pigs, NIB, Iron Man, and Paranoid on July 5, 2025. Though his body was failing, his voice retained the distinctive wail that had defined heavy metal. Tears streamed through his makeup as he thanked the crowd in his hometown, seeming to understand this was his final bow. 17 days later, on July 22, 2025, Ozzy Osbourne died surrounded by his family. The official cause was listed as cardiac arrest and coronary artery disease, with Parkinson's disease as a contributing factor. The world lost a pioneer, his family lost their center. The question of legacy now hangs over the Osbourne fortune. How does one divide an empire built on chaos and rebellion? Who inherits not just the assets but the responsibility of maintaining Ozzy's musical legacy for future generations? Can any trust or estate plan possibly capture the spirit of a man who lived so completely outside conventional boundaries? Sharon, always the pragmatist even in grief, had worked with Ozzy to establish detailed plans. The bulk of his musical catalog has been placed in a trust designed to benefit not just immediate family, but also grandchildren not yet born. Charitable foundations focused on Parkinson's research, music education for disadvantaged youth, and animal welfare will receive substantial endowments, ensuring Ozzy's generosity extends beyond his lifetime. But for heirs, inheriting Ozzy's wealth means inheriting a public persona they had no hand in creating. Will Jack, Kelly, Amy, and Louis feel obligated to maintain the Osbourne brand, or will they choose to step away from its shadow? Can they separate the business of being an Osbourne from the private grief of losing their father? These questions linger as the world processes the loss of a genuine original. In studios and bedrooms around the globe, young musicians pick up guitars and attempt to replicate the sound Black Sabbath pioneered. In streaming queues, Ozzy's catalog experiences the inevitable post-mortem surge. In Birmingham, fans leave flowers outside his childhood home, tributes to the working-class hero who never forgot where he came from. What matters about Ozzy Ossbourne isn't ultimately the fortune he accumulated or even the music he created, though both are substantial. What matters is the resilience he embodied, the refusal to surrender to expectations, the courage to fail publicly and try again, the vulnerability to show his weaknesses alongside his strengths. In an industry built on artifice, Ozzy offered authenticity, sometimes brutal in its honesty. The boy who couldn't read became the man whose words would be studied by generations of musicians. The factory worker's son left a fortune that could support his family for generations. The addict who was fired from his own band rebuilt himself into a global brand. These transformations speak to possibilities within us all, the potential to transcend circumstances, to rewrite narratives, to find second and third and fourth acts when others would have closed the book. The inheritance Ozzy leaves isn't just financial, but philosophical, a testament to perseverance and the power of being unapologetically yourself, even when that self is complicated, contradictory, and constantly evolving. In the quiet of an English summer evening, as the Osbourne family begins the process of moving forward without their patriarch, the legacy that matters most isn't counted in dollars or pounds but in moments. The father who, despite his fame, made time to attend school plays. The husband who, despite his demons, fought to be worthy of his wife's devotion. The performer who, despite his physical limitations, gave everything he had to his audience until the very end. If Ozzy's music ever carried you through a dark night, if his laughter on The Osbournes ever brightened a difficult day, if his perseverance ever inspired you to keep going when surrender seemed easier, consider taking a moment to acknowledge his journey. Even a single note of gratitude is a whisper of recognition for a life lived at maximum volume, a life that proved even the most unlikely candidates can leave indelible marks on our shared cultural landscape. As the final notes of Paranoid fade into memory, as the spotlight dims on a stage now empty of its most magnetic presence, Ozzy Osbourne's voice echoes on, reminding us that the most valuable legacies aren't built on fortunes but on courage, the courage to remain authentic in a world constantly demanding conformity. In that authenticity, even through tears, we find something worth celebrating.